Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for another value-packed TenantCloud podcast. If you want to be a more informed, better educated, and successful landlord, then stay tuned. With over a decade of property management experience, we bring you short and sweet, bite-sized pieces of incredibly valuable property management tidbits in 10 minutes or less. While being a landlord can certainly be stressful, being a tenant and moving into a new home can be equally as stressful. In this podcast, we discuss some powerful ideas on how to create an incredible first impression and really take that first step in establishing a positive relationship with your newly moved in tenant by focusing on just 3 simple things. You won't want to miss out on these best practices that top performing landlords make sure they do with every new move-in. So let's get started. So jumping right in, there are 3 core things that experienced property managers and landlords do with every new move-in to help build that credibility, that relationship of trust, and just the genuine positive relationships with their tenants, and just creating that really great first impression that earns you resident referrals, and when that tenant moves out, earns you referrals for the tenant that replaces them, and just in general are just really good practices to follow with new tenants to help make their life easier, make your life easier, and everything is awesome on move-in day, and to help avoid a lot of the pitfalls that inexperienced landlords fall into on move-in day by not being prepared or not informing the tenant of the things that they need to be aware of in order to be prepared, and so on and so forth. So without further ado, getting started, number 1 is preparation. You want to make sure that you and the tenant are both have the same expectations for the moving day and the exact time that they're going to be moving in. And if you're not going to have an exact time picked out, then there needs to be a clear and concise way for them to pick up keys and know what that process is for them to move in the event that you are not available or you are not there, if it's on a weekend when your offices are closed, and so on and so forth. You do not want to get a phone call as a landlord or a property manager at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday when you're out trying to spend time with your family or friends or just relaxing, and your tenant is trying to move in and they can't because they can't find the keys, or the keys didn't arrive, or they thought somebody was going to meet them at your office or at the property at the move-in time, or whatever it is. There's 1,000 scenarios that play out. And so it's extremely important that you and your tenant are on the same note when it comes to picking a move-in day and the exact time. It is always good to avoid Fridays and definitely avoid bank holidays, because bank holidays, if the tenant needs to go and get a money order or a certified check or something of that nature from their bank or their financial institution, chances are they're going to be closed if it is a holiday. And so you want to make sure that you're avoiding those days for things like move-in days, and that will really help you and the tenant to not run into any obstacles or inconveniences when trying to move in. Also, you want to make sure that you recommend your tenant that they have professional movers come on move-in day, because if it's just them and they're running behind, a lot of delays can happen, and that can end up costing you money and frustration as well, especially if you do schedule for a Friday and they run into all these issues and a truck breaks down or their car breaks down or they get called into an emergency at their job or something of that nature. So it's important that they have, that you recommend that they call and have somebody help them move. It's always better to do that, and that way it helps you avoid any pitfalls that come along with a tenant moving themselves. Number 2, packing and things around packing. You want to recommend to your tenants a few things. One is, you personally as the landlord, you want to make sure that the apartment or the rental unit or the house, whatever it is clean for your tenants. It can be extremely frustrating for a tenant to be moving or trying to move in all their stuff, and a lot of times their stuff is going to fill up entire rooms, and so you need to make sure that you have the rental unit cleaned prior to them arriving with all of the stuff they've packed and are going to be trying to unpack into your rental. So that is extremely important. The other thing about packing is it's important that you recommend that your tenant start their renter's insurance and maybe even get mover's insurance. And the reason for that is because when tenants are moving in or moving out and they've packed all this stuff, sometimes they don't pack the best. And sometimes even professional movers can cause damages when moving, especially large items in and out of the rental. And so it's a good thing to recommend to your tenants that they have their renter's insurance started prior to the move-in day, or at least definitely effective the morning of the move-in day. And you want to make sure that maybe they even have mover's insurance for packing day or unpacking day, whichever it is for them. And also you want to make sure that if there are pets or things of that nature that are going to be involved with the move, that just bring those things up to your tenant and just say, hey, I know you have a dog that you're going to be moving with. Is there anything I can do to make moving a little bit easier for you with your pet? And maybe you have a yard or something on the property that the pet can be put into, or a kennel that you can lend them, or something of that nature. These are just little things that your tenants don't always take into consideration until moving day. And what you're trying to do is remove and eliminate as many obstacles or conflicts on that day, because they have a million things on their mind. So anything you can do to kind of bring things to light, even if they don't end up asking you for help, at least you're bringing it to the surface so that they're like, oh yeah, thank you so much. I didn't even think about that. I'm going to have to figure out what to do with my pet, or I'm going to have a babysitter for my kids, or a lot of things like that. And so it's really helpful to your tenants to try and kind of just bring those things up. And really, you could even have these things on a checklist, on a move-in checklist. And a lot of landlords do that for their tenants. They'll provide them as a part of their move-in packet. They'll just give them a checklist or a list of things to think about on moving day. Basically, it's just like line items of all the things that they have to take into consideration. So just a few ways there on packing or unpacking day, moving day, on how to make your tenant's life a little bit easier. Also, make sure that for that day that they are on that moving day, they've got, again, a lot of stuff on their mind. Make sure that they remember to have a conversation with their local post office and make sure that they file whatever necessary paperwork online or in person to forward all of their mail to the new address so that they're not having to scramble and go back to their old address to try to find mail and stuff like that. So the other thing that you may want to consider doing as far as the packing goes, and this is kind of like a little pro tip for you, is if you didn't provide it at the time that they toured, you may want to actually provide them with a layout of each room with exact measurements, because I can't count how many times tenants would move in and they were not able to move in a certain piece of furniture, or they ended up having to get rid of something like a bed or a sofa or a table because it was too big for the space or even too small for the space. So that really helps go a long way for tenants if you send them and just as a general reminder to them, hey, I know you're going to be moving in a week or whatever. Here is a floor plan. I didn't remember if I shared it with you before, but here's all the exact measurements in case you have any questions about where stuff's going to fit and so on and so forth. So just something to keep in mind. It could just be included in your move-in packet or your move-in email for tenants. And it just helps them, again, be better prepared on moving day. The last thing is on moving day. You want to make sure that the moving company or the tenant or whoever is moving the stuff in is able to get into your rental property without any issues. Again, this comes down to things like if you live in a gated community, whether it's a residential neighborhood, they're renting your house or whatever, and there's a gate they need a code for or a pass card for or something of that nature, or if it's an apartment building and they can't get in without codes and so on and so forth, you want to make sure that they have all of that information prior to arriving so that, again, you don't get that phone call at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday or whatever where, oh, man, I don't know how to get into the property. I completely forgot to ask you what is the code or the security alarm, and so on and so forth. The other thing you want to do to make sure that they are ready for moving day is, depending on what utilities and things they are responsible for, you want to make sure that they have set those things up. And so I know that I, as a property manager, would oftentimes require that the tenant provide me with their confirmation numbers or even account numbers for the various services that they were required to set up a few days in advance. So if they were moving in on a Wednesday, I might send them an email the week before, or that Monday of that week, and say, hey, just want to remind you, you're responsible for setting up electricity and gas, and also your cable and internet. So can you please provide me with your electricity, gas, and cable account numbers if that is applicable? And that way it's a general reminder to them, like, oh yeah, man, I completely forgot to set all this stuff up. They're going to have to make those really fast phone calls to the electricity company, to the gas company, because those utility companies, they'll do an emergency turn on, but usually a lot of them do, but they're also going to charge a premium for that. And so especially if it's within a 48-hour window. So that's why I try to do it the week before, a full 5 to 7 days in advance, because that gives them plenty of time to reach out to the utility providers to turn it on without being charged some emergency fee of some sort, or even risk that it's not turned on the day that they move in and it's not in their name, and then you have this big hassle where it's still in your name because they didn't switch it over, and so now you have to bill them for it, and it can get really messy. So you just want to make sure that you're doing as much as possible to help your tenant on move-in day, because like I said, they have a lot going on. Being a landlord or a property manager is extremely stressful, but so can being a tenant moving to a new rental property. And so anything that you can do, any system you can put into place where it's pretty much all automated in a sense, to where you just, every new move-in, you do the same thing over and over and over again, and you just kind of have this formula where all the same content goes out to each new move-in. It'll really help you if you set aside some time to really formulate that plan for your specific rental property. And it'll save you a lot of time and headache in the future for both yourself and your tenants. So that pretty much covers everything on our list. I'm sure there's plenty of other things that a lot of other property managers do as general practices to make sure that they're prepared for move-in day and their tenant is prepared for move-in day. So feel free to chime in wherever you hear this podcast. We'll also have the link to the blog that this podcast is based off of, which is tips for tenants on how to make moving less stressful. And you can access that at TenantCloud.com/blog. And be sure to follow us on whatever platform you are listening to us on, whether it's Stitcher or Google Podcasts or Apple Podcasts. Anywhere you hear us, we'd love it if you would follow us. We publish content on a regular basis, and we love it when you guys interact with us. And feel free to chime in and let us know what are some of your best practices on how you prepare for move-in day for your tenants to make your day and their day a little bit less stressful. Until next time, my name is Chris with TenantCloud, and we'll talk to you next week.